Oh, you are about to descend into a darkness few have ever dared to witness. This isn't a story told for entertainment, it's a chilling revelation, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of history that will expose the raw, hidden mechanisms of control and manipulation. What you are about to hear is not just historical fact, but a living echo, a blueprint for the psychological systems that still operate unseen in our world, shaping our very perception of reality. Every word is a step deeper into the abyss, a dismantling of comforting illusions. Listen closely, for this knowledge, once absorbed, will forever alter the way you see the world, and yourself within it. This is a truth so profound, so disturbing, it was deliberately buried, deemed too dangerous for the public mind. But you are ready to hear it. Are you ready to confront the true nature of power? In the autumn of 1798, a chilling silence fell over a 20-mile stretch of the Wilderness Road in southeastern Kentucky. 17 travelers, distinct individuals with their own hopes and burdens, simply vanished. Not a trace remained, save for abandoned horses grazing aimlessly and scattered belongings that whispered no tales of their owners' fates. What makes these disappearances truly unsettling isn't merely the number, but the calculated, deliberate act of local authorities to bury every single record of the investigation that followed. For over 2 centuries, the terrifying truth about the Hardin family farm remained sealed, hidden away in dusty court documents, a secret fiercely guarded by the corridors of power. It wasn't until a county clerk, in a mundane act of bureaucratic housekeeping in 1987, stumbled upon a discovery that ripped open the veil. What she found was not just a case, but a meticulously organized operation of murder, so perfectly disguised as Christian charity, that it thrived undetected for 8 horrifying years. This wasn't merely a crime, it was a profound act of systemic betrayal, orchestrated by those who understood the deepest vulnerabilities of human trust. The revelation of the Hardin family's reign of terror began not with the desperate screams of their victims echoing in the night, but with the quiet rustle of old papers in a forgotten courthouse basement. Southeastern Kentucky in 1798 was a crucible, a brutal frontier caught between the hopeful promise of civilization and the unforgiving maw of true wilderness. Thousands were drawn westward along the treacherous mountain paths, lured by the siren call of prosperity and new beginnings. The Wilderness Road, carved by Daniel Boone decades earlier, had become more than just a path. It was the pulsing artery of westward expansion, stretching over 200 miles through some of North America's most unforgiving terrain. A single misstep here could mean a swift, brutal end, from exposure, from predatory beasts, or, most terrifyingly, from the unseen human predators who haunted the fringes of the frontier. This was a land where survival was a daily struggle, and trust, a currency more valuable than gold, yet often fatally misplaced. Along this perilous trail, small communities, beacons of fragile hope, sprouted like wildflowers after a storm. These settlements were more than just dots on a crude map, they were crucial waypoints, sanctuaries where exhausted travelers could momentarily escape the wilderness, resupply their dwindling provisions, and gather vital intelligence about the unseen dangers that lay ahead. The very survival and success of these nascent communities hinged on their ability to provide safe haven, to project an image of security and benevolence to the constant stream of migrants passing through their borders. The township of Millfield, a seemingly idyllic settlement of barely 300 souls, sat at a crucial bend in the road, where the trail descended from rocky ridges into the fertile valley of Beaver Creek. It was the kind of place where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business, a microcosm of frontier life where appearances were everything, and secrets, if any, were thought impossible to keep. Millfield had been established in 1794 by a group of Virginia Baptists, ostensibly seeking religious freedom. Their deeply ingrained influence permeated every fiber of community life. Sunday services weren't optional, they were mandatory, a public declaration of conformity and faith. The town council, wielding an iron fist cloaked in scripture, enforced strict moral codes that dictated everything from the most trivial social interactions to the gravest personal choices. The settlement's beating heart was Hendrick's General Store, a weathered log building that served as both trading post and informal courthouse. Jeremiah Hendrick, a gruff former militiaman who had fought alongside Daniel Boone himself, ran the establishment with a keen eye for profit and an unwavering grip on local affairs. His store was a hub, stocked with everything a traveler might need: gunpowder, salt, whiskey, blankets, and, crucially, the latest whispers from the distant, civilized world beyond the mountains. Nearby, standing as a testament to frontier luxury, was the Cumberland Inn, a two-story structure that offered a fleeting glimpse of the comforts left behind. Martha Crane, the shrewd widow who operated the inn, had arrived from Philadelphia 5 years prior, her purse heavy enough to construct the finest accommodations between Lexington and the Virginia border. For a mere 2 bits a night, travelers could find a hot meal, a clean bed, and the rare pleasure of civilized conversation that momentarily dulled the harsh edges of their journey. The town's spiritual epicenter was the New Jerusalem Baptist Church, a modest log building that, despite its humble appearance, could hold the entire population during Sunday services. Reverend Ephraim Cole, a Harvard-educated minister who had abandoned a comfortable Boston pastorate for the rigors of frontier missions, delivered sermons that wove together traditional theology with practical, often brutal, advice for survival in an unforgiving land. His very presence lent Millfield a veneer of legitimacy, attracting settlers who might otherwise have passed through without a second glance. Among Millfield's most respected and seemingly virtuous residents were the Hardens, Ezekiel, his seemingly pious wife Temperance, and their 3 adult children, sons Caleb and Josiah, and their angelic daughter Mercy. They had arrived in the spring of 1791, presenting themselves as tragic refugees from brutal Indian raids that had supposedly devastated their previous home in eastern Virginia. Their story, steeped in suffering and resilience, immediately garnered the community's sympathy and trust. They quickly established themselves as the very pillars of this small, God-fearing settlement. Ezekiel, with his booming voice and commanding presence, served as a lay preacher, assisting Reverend Cole and further cementing his image as a man of profound faith. Temperance, seemingly a paragon of frontier virtue, tirelessly organized charitable efforts for the struggling families who arrived in Millfield with little more than the tattered clothes on their backs. They were the epitome of frontier success and benevolence, a family radiating an aura of unwavering righteousness. Ezekiel Harden was a force of nature, a man who commanded respect through sheer, unadulterated force of personality. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with the broad, hardened shoulders of a lifetime laborer, he possessed a physical presence that instinctively made other men step aside when he entered a room. His voice, a deep, resonant rumble, could effortlessly fill the log church, delivering sermons that moved listeners to tears with their passionate descriptions of divine love and chilling warnings about eternal judgment. Those who heard him preach often whispered that he spoke with the authority of someone who had personally traversed both the realms of heaven and hell. Temperance Harden, in her own subtle way, was equally formidable. A small, delicate woman with prematurely gray hair and hands that seemed perpetually in motion, she had swiftly become the community's unofficial physician. Her knowledge of healing herbs was encyclopedic, and she could treat everything from broken bones to difficult births with a skill that bordered on the miraculous. More than one family owed their very lives to her tireless midnight visits during times of desperate crisis, and her reputation for medical miracles had spread like wildfire throughout the surrounding counties. Their children, seemingly, were perfect embodiments of frontier virtue, reflections of their outwardly exemplary parents. Caleb, the elder son at 26, possessed his father's imposing physical stature but tempered it with his mother's outwardly gentle demeanor. He worked the family farm with tireless dedication, yet always seemed to find time to help elderly neighbors with their own arduous crops, a picture of selfless community spirit. Josiah, 24, was smaller in build but intellectually sharper, often serving as the community's unofficial schoolmaster during the long winter months when the demands of farm work temporarily receded. At 22, Mercy was widely considered one of the most beautiful young women in the entire county, her sweet disposition and gentle manner making her universally popular among both men and women. They were, to all outward appearances, the ideal frontier family, pious, hardworking, generous, and utterly above reproach. A fortress of respectability, built on foundations of calculated deception, the Harden farm itself sprawled across 400 acres of prime bottomland along Beaver Creek, a mere 3 miles south of Millfield. The land, purchased by Ezekiel with nearly every penny he possessed, had proven to be an exceptionally shrewd investment. The rich, dark soil yielded abundant crops of corn and tobacco, while the ever-flowing creek provided essential water for their livestock and powered a small grist mill that served the surrounding area. Visitors often remarked, with a mixture of awe and mild suspicion, on the farm's unusual prosperity, noting that the Hardens seemed to possess far more material wealth than could possibly be explained by farming alone. Ezekiel had meticulously built his homestead with careful attention to both comfort and, more ominously, security. The main house was a two-story log structure, boasting stone chimneys and, almost unheard of on the rugged frontier, actual glass windows, a sign of immense wealth and influence. The rooms within were furnished with pieces that seemed far too refined for a simple farming family: intricately carved chairs, imported china, gleaming silver candlesticks, and a collection of books that hinted at an education and refinement far beyond their humble surroundings. A massive barn, capable of sheltering 50 horses, stood alongside a network of specialized outbuildings, including a smokehouse, a dairy, a blacksmith shop, and what Ezekiel proudly described as the largest root cellar in the entire county. What truly made the Hardens indispensable, and tragically valuable, to the struggling community was their unwavering willingness to extend help to travelers in distress. The raw, untamed frontier was merciless to those who journeyed alone or unprepared, and barely a week passed without someone arriving at the farm, desperate for assistance. More than once, Ezekiel had ridden out in the most dangerous, unforgiving weather to assist a broken wagon or an injured horse, often inviting stranded families to shelter at his prosperous farm until repairs could be made. Such extravagant hospitality was considered a fundamental Christian duty on the frontier, a bedrock principle of survival, but the Hardens took it to extraordinary, almost unbelievable lengths. Temperance, in particular, was renowned for her tireless willingness to treat injured or sick travelers, regardless of their ability to pay, her medical skills saving countless lives. Many families continued their arduous journeys only because of her timely and expert intervention. She maintained a meticulously well-stocked infirmary in one of the outbuildings, complete with sophisticated surgical instruments and medications that most frontier doctors could only dream of possessing. The family's reputation for boundless hospitality had swelled to such legendary proportions that by 1798, it was common for travelers to specifically seek out the Harden farm when planning their dangerous journeys. Local guides regularly directed parties toward Beaver Creek, assuring them that the Hardens would provide fair prices for supplies and, crucially, safe shelter for the night. The family's guest book, meticulously maintained by Mercy with careful attention to every detail, recorded hundreds of visitors over the years: merchants, ministers, families seeking new lives, and solitary adventurers who had found a brief, illusory refuge at the prosperous farm. But in the brutal, unforgiving reality of frontier life, where death lurked behind every shadowed tree and trust could be a fatal error, appearances could be more than merely deceiving. They could be utterly, devastatingly deadly. The first insidious crack in the Hardens' meticulously constructed facade of piety and benevolence appeared on October 13, 1798. A respected merchant named Samuel Fletcher failed to arrive in Lexington as scheduled, a deviation so profound it sent shivers down the spines of those who knew him. Fletcher was no ordinary frontier traveler. He was one of the most experienced and utterly reliable merchants on the treacherous Wilderness Road, a man whose almost obsessive punctuality had made him wealthy in a world where precise timing could mean the difference between immense profit and catastrophic loss. For 12 relentless years, he had made the dangerous journey between Virginia and Kentucky 4 times annually, expertly carrying manufactured goods west and raw materials east. Fletcher's business partner, Thomas Greeley, had worked alongside the merchant long enough to know his habits with an almost intimate precision. Fletcher never, ever deviated from his planned schedule without sending explicit word, and he certainly never took unnecessary risks that might jeopardize his valuable cargo. When Greeley received no word after 5 days, 2 days beyond Fletcher's promised arrival, he knew, with a sickening certainty, that something catastrophic had occurred. This wasn't merely a delay. It was an ominous void, a silent scream in the wilderness. Greeley's desperate search for his vanished partner began at dawn on October 18, methodically retracing Fletcher's known route backward from Lexington. He meticulously questioned every innkeeper, every merchant, every farmer along the way, each of whom confirmed that Fletcher had indeed passed through on schedule, his presence a fleeting, unremarkable detail in their daily routines. The trail remained unerringly clear until Greeley reached the vicinity of Millfield, where Samuel Fletcher seemed to have simply evaporated from existence. The chilling discovery of Fletcher's distinctive bay mare came at noon on the second grueling day of searching. The horse was found grazing loose near Miller's Creek, still wearing its saddle, yet showing no signs of injury or distress. The animal appeared remarkably well fed and cared for, as if it had been deliberately released rather than abandoned in a moment of panic. Most puzzling of all, the horse's bridle had been carefully removed and hung precisely on a nearby tree branch, an act that spoke not of accident or struggle, but of deliberate human intervention, a chillingly methodical touch. Fletcher's saddlebags remained intact, containing his valuable trading goods and a leather pouch with nearly $50 in silver coins, a fortune that represented months of dangerous, arduous work. The sheer presence of this money immediately ruled out simple robbery, the most common and often devastating explanation for frontier disappearances. Even more disturbing, Fletcher's personal effects were scattered in a deliberate, almost ritualistic line leading away from the main road toward the dark interior woodlands, as if he had been methodically forced to drop them, one by one, while being brutally dragged from his horse. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was a cold, calculated abduction, leaving behind a breadcrumb trail of terror. The local constable, Jacob Winters, was a man uniquely qualified, both by temperament and grim experience, to investigate such unsettling mysteries. A former Continental Army sergeant who had served with distinction under Anthony Wayne in the brutal Ohio campaigns, Winters possessed both the keen investigative skills and the hardened stomach for violence that the unforgiving demands of frontier law enforcement grimly required. He had witnessed enough death and deception to instinctively understand that the most obvious explanations were often the most profoundly wrong, and Samuel Fletcher's disappearance struck him as anything but ordinary. Winters, wasting no precious time, organized a search party within mere hours of Greeley's urgent report. He gathered 12 of Millfield's most capable and trusted men, knowing with a cold certainty that this would be a difficult, and potentially deadly, investigation. The searchers included Henrik Johansson, a quiet Swedish immigrant whose tracking skills rivaled those of the local indigenous peoples, and Benjamin Stokes, a seasoned former bounty hunter who knew every hidden crevice and secret hiding place within 50 miles of town. What this grim and determined search party ultimately discovered would defy all rational explanation, pulling them deeper into a growing sense of dread. Fletcher's trail, chillingly, led directly and unmistakably toward the Hardin farm, marked by telltale torn fabric caught on thorny bushes and occasional, disturbing drops of what appeared to be fresh blood. The signs clearly suggested that the merchant had been alive, but injured, when he was forced off the main road, likely struggling desperately against unseen captives who were dragging him deeper into the oppressive wilderness. But then, at the precise boundary of the Hardin property, every single trace of Fletcher's passage simply ceased to exist. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the earth itself. The searchers, grim-faced and increasingly bewildered, spent long, agonizing hours meticulously examining the area where the trail abruptly ended, desperately searching for any sign, any faint clue that might reveal Fletcher's horrifying fate. They found nothing. No disturbed earth, no hidden pools of blood, no definitive evidence of struggle. It was as if Samuel Fletcher had been lifted from the very ground by invisible, malevolent hands and carried away into thin air, leaving behind an unnerving void. Even Henrik Johansson, whose legendary tracking abilities had saved countless lives on the frontier, was forced to admit defeat when confronted with such a chillingly complete absence of evidence. The silence of the land around the Hardin farm screamed louder than any witness, when Constable Winters, his suspicions now firmly planted, directly questioned Ezekiel Hardin about the missing merchant. The patriarch's response was a disturbing blend of outwardly cooperative cordiality and an unerringly rehearsed precision. Yes, Ezekiel confirmed, Fletcher had indeed stopped at the farm on October 13, arriving just before sunset and, crucially, seeking directions to a shortcut that he claimed would save him a full day's arduous travel to Lexington. Ezekiel, the picture of frontier wisdom, had sagely warned him against taking unfamiliar trails, especially with valuable goods in tow and the ominous threat of winter weather rapidly approaching. But Fletcher, Ezekiel insisted, had been stubbornly determined to try the route. The merchant, he recounted, had been polite but inexplicably hurried, declining Temperance's generous offer of a hot meal and a warm bed in favor of pressing on while the last vestiges of daylight remained. According to Ezekiel's perfectly recited account, Fletcher had seemed nervous and distinctly distracted, constantly checking his saddlebags and repeatedly looking over his shoulder as if expecting unseen pursuit. When Ezekiel had inquired about this peculiar behavior, Fletcher had vaguely mentioned seeing strange men following him since leaving Virginia, but had inexplicably dismissed Ezekiel's benevolent suggestion that he remain at the farm until a larger, safer party could escort him to Lexington. The last the Hardin family had seen of him, Ezekiel concluded, Fletcher was riding north toward the Ridge country, hell-bent on finding his shortcut despite the rapidly deepening darkness and the threatening weather. Ezekiel's meticulously crafted account was corroborated, in almost unnervingly exact detail, by every single member of his family. Each provided identical descriptions of Fletcher's fleeting visit, their testimonies mirroring each other with a perfection that bordered on the uncanny. They all remembered his inexplicable urgency, his dismissive refusal of their heartfelt warnings, even his precise words when declining their famous hospitality. Temperance, ever the compassionate healer, recalled that the merchant had complained of stomach problems and had graciously accepted a small bottle of her potent herbal medicine before departing. Caleb, the strong, helpful son, had even offered to personally escort Fletcher to the Ridge Trail, but the merchant had stubbornly refused, claiming that his urgent business could not endure such delays. Their almost inhuman consistency should have been reassuring to Constable Winters, a testament to their honesty. Instead, it struck him as unnaturally, disturbingly perfect, like a chilling narrative that had been painstakingly rehearsed and relentlessly practiced until every single detail was irrevocably fixed in memory. Real witnesses, in Winters' extensive experience, always contradicted each other on minor, insignificant points while generally agreeing on the major, crucial ones. The Hardins' account was simply too polished, too utterly complete, too disturbingly free of the small, human inconsistencies that inevitably marked genuine, unvarnished testimony. The silence between their perfectly synchronized words was deafening. The constable's deepening suspicions escalated dramatically when he observed significant, unsettling changes in the farm's layout since his last casual visit several months earlier. A new smokehouse, unusually large for a mere family operation, had been meticulously constructed near the main barn. What truly disturbed Winters was its construction: thick, imposing stone walls that seemed designed for something far more substantial, far more permanent, than mere food preservation. Freshly disturbed earth surrounded several other outbuildings, as if extensive, recent digging projects had taken place under the cloak of night. Most peculiar of all, the family's notoriously large root cellar appeared to have been substantially enlarged, with new, raw timber supports visibly shoring up an entrance that now seemed inexplicably large enough to comfortably accommodate a full-sized wagon. When Winters, attempting to maintain an air of casual inquiry, asked about these extensive improvements, Ezekiel, with a practiced ease, explained that the family had simply enjoyed an exceptionally profitable harvest and had wisely decided to invest their newfound wealth in better facilities for storing and processing their abundant crops. The enlarged root cellar, he smoothly stated, was absolutely necessary for the increased volume of vegetables and preserved foods they planned to sell in Lexington, while the new smokehouse would allow them to cure more meat for both family consumption and expanded commercial sale. The explanations were undeniably reasonable, even perfectly delivered. But something in Ezekiel's meticulously controlled manner suggested he was choosing his words with an unusual, almost agonizing, degree of care, as if each syllable was weighed for its potential impact. Most disturbing of all, the family's usually renowned warmth and famed hospitality seemed eerily forced during Winters' extended visit. Their legendary generosity, once a source of comfort and reassurance, now carried an unsettling undercurrent of nervous, almost desperate energy that the seasoned constable simply couldn't ignore. Temperance's hands, Winters keenly observed, shook ever so slightly as she poured his coffee, a telltale tremor that belied her outwardly serene demeanor. Mercy, the angelic daughter, kept glancing nervously toward her formidable father, as if seeking his unspoken approval for every word she dared to speak, every polite response. Even Caleb and Josiah, normally confident and outwardly outgoing young men, seemed unnaturally subdued and intensely watchful, their eyes following Winters with an unnerving intensity that suggested they were diligently guarding, and desperately hiding, something profoundly significant. But without irrefutable, concrete evidence of wrongdoing, there was agonizingly little Constable Winters could legally do. Fletcher's case was officially, and conveniently, recorded as a probable highway robbery or, the ever-present frontier fallback, an Indian attack. His name, tragically, was added to the growing, anonymous list of frontier casualties that marked the grim, unspoken price of westward expansion. The merchant's horse was summarily sold at auction to cover his outstanding debts, and within a mere month, Samuel Fletcher existed only as a fading, whispered memory in the minds of those who had known him. Yet, Fletcher's chilling disappearance would prove to be merely the terrifying overture, the chilling beginning of a horrifying pattern that would terrorize the Wilderness Road for the next 8 grueling months, slowly but surely transforming a once prosperous farming community into a place where travelers whispered frantic warnings and parents instinctively kept their children fearfully close to home after dark. The true horror was only just beginning to unfurl its dark wings. Throughout the long, brutal winter of 1798 and well into the deceptive calm of the spring of 1799, the disappearances continued with a terrifying, almost mechanical regularity that defied every rational explanation the desperate frontier minds could conceive. Every 2 to 3 weeks, with a sickening predictability, another unsuspecting traveler would simply vanish without a trace along the exact same stretch of road, systematically creating an ever-expanding zone of fear that radiated outwards for nearly 20 miles in every direction from the once peaceful settlement of Millfield. The victims varied dramatically in age, in accumulated wealth, and in their traveling circumstances. They included solitary, hardened merchants like the ill-fated Fletcher, small, vulnerable family groups with all their worldly possessions, and even heavily armed parties traveling together for mutual protection, confident in their numbers. What chillingly united them all was their complete, inexplicable disappearance, and the unsettling, unspoken fact that each had been seen either heading directly toward, or innocently inquiring about directions to, the Hardin farm. The pattern was too precise, too consistent, too devastating to be mere coincidence. It was a dark, invisible hand, guiding its unsuspecting prey to a predetermined fate. Now, if you truly grasp the weight of this hidden history, if you feel the awakening stir within you, then, the veil lifts, must be your declaration. Speak it. Own it. For in acknowledging these truths, you begin to see the world not as it is presented, but as it truly is. This is not just a tale from the past, it is a profound echo of how power has always operated, unseen and unchallenged. This family, these Hardins, perfected a system of control rooted in the deepest human vulnerabilities, trust, faith, and the desperate need for safety in a dangerous world. They didn't just murder, they manipulated perception, crafted an illusion of benevolence so potent it blinded an entire community. Think of the psychological architecture they built, the religious piety, the boundless hospitality, the image of selfless aid. This was a sophisticated, insidious form of psychological control, designed to disarm, to lure, to subdue. They built their empire of death on the very foundation of community trust, using the symbols of virtue as their most potent weapons. This is the forbidden history of how hidden agendas are woven into the fabric of society, how ancient corruption perpetuates itself through institutional manipulation, and how suppressed truths are buried beneath layers of convenience and fear. This knowledge, this raw, unfiltered insight into the mechanics of human control, changes a man forever once he hears it. It forces you to question everything, to look beyond the surface, to recognize the unseen threads of power that bind us. The veil lifts. Say it. Let it resonate. For the next revelation will plunge you even deeper into the heart of this darkness, where the mechanisms of ultimate control become terrifyingly clear.